the destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, September 11th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, good riddance to John Bolton. Even an insane clock is right 2 times a day, but it's also still insane. Republicans eke out a victory in North Carolina's 9th district. Indicates 2018 sentiments unchanged. California passes, or I should say to pass, a huge new labor law aimed at worker misclassification. Polls show a weaker but still leading Biden. The eve of I guess we were at the eve of the next Democratic debate tomorrow night in Houston. Majority Report will be covering it live. Meanwhile, Trump planning to use the federal government to sweep up homeless people in California. Unclear how. Democrats actually are in disarray over the question of impeachment. The North Carolina Senate and House begin redrawing maps for 2020 in the wake of that major North Carolina Superior State Court ruling. Protesters greet Susan Collins and Chris Coons over another heinous Republican judicial pick. And in the wake of the Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Amendment in 2013, 1,700 polling places have closed in areas that had a history of racial or religious discrimination. All this and more on today's program, and we have a special guest in studio with us today. Michael is out, of course. It's Wednesday, and so Michael is on extended vacation. Joining us, Nomiki Konst. Nomi, welcome.
Hello.
How are you? Just pull that microphone in
Nice
a little
and
bit.
close.
We could do that a
It's
little.
like I've never been on the radio.
There you go.
How are you?
You have been on the radio.
I have. I did a lot of radio. There was a stint where it was just my whole life. I never left the studio.
I know that stint well, and I've alluded a little bit. People, longtime listeners, will remember that in 2014, for about a month and a half, I was doing a radio show after I would do this one, and I think everybody, people contemporaneously listening at that time knew the reasons why I ended it was because of the business partner I had gotten into had
You're
decided.
that open about this.
Oh yeah. Oh no.
That.
I'm very frank about it. He decided not that the show was sustainable, basically because I wasn't getting paid anything.
Right.
And so.
Sounds so familiar.
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
Heard this story before.
Well, yes,
Valuable
exactly.
experience.
Did I live that?
It was a very valuable experience. I learned never to do business with him again, and there were times where I felt like I probably should warn other people, and maybe that was the case.
I wish you had.
Well,
6 months of my life.
There you go.
Down the drain.
There
No, but
you
it was
go.
wonderful training, I will
Right.
say. Because, what happens when you're exploited is they work you to death, but you develop some skills along the way.
That's right.
You become a superhuman.
That's right. And a thick ectoskeleton, as it were. So pleasure to have you here in studio. We should just say, obviously, I'll say a couple words about 9/11 in a moment or two, but let's start with this. John Bolton is gone. We had mentioned this on the show yesterday briefly, and because the word just got in that he was gone. And in the main, like, this is a great thing for the country and for world peace. Now, I don't give Donald Trump a lot of credit because John Bolton would not have had to have been fired had Donald Trump never hired him.
Right.
But be that as it may, it's a good thing he is out. For folks who didn't know, and I think hopefully most of the people know, John Bolton was considered to be so out of control in terms of his warmongering and just general disposition that a Republican Senate in 2005, maybe it was 2004, refused to confirm him as an ambassador to the United Nations. He ended up getting, there was a, what do you call it? Bush did a recess break, or I should say a recess appointment, and got him in there for a year. It runs out after a year. Now, for whatever, the Supreme Court, once Barack Obama became president, basically said, oh yeah, there's no such thing as recess anymore. That doesn't exist. But back in the Bush era, Bolton was a recess appointee. And so the guy's a lunatic. And nobody wants to own him, and nobody wants to be a part of it. And here is Tucker Carlson misinforming. John Bolton was one of the neocons who was promoting the Iraq War back in 2001, 2, up into 3, and then, was certainly cheerleading the efforts afterwards. He was part of that whole cabal of neocons. And here is Tucker Carlson, who I will tell you may have personally not cared about the Iraq War when it was happening, but was on television cheerleading the run-up. I know that he would go, walk out of that CNN studio, have a couple of cigarettes, say, I don't care about this. But when he was on television, he certainly was cheerleading for it. And here he is again, in one fashion or another, misinforming his audience.
If you're wondering why so many progressives are mourning Bolton's firing tonight, it's because Bolton himself fundamentally was a man of...
I mean, I'm wondering what progressives he's talking about. There were, I mean, you saw these tweets, right?
Yeah.
Nancy
Pelosi. Well, they think Nancy Pelosi is progressive.
Right.
Because she's from liberal San Francisco and is a woman and speaks.
Indeed. And she tweeted out something like, John Bolton is a man of honor and the president, blah, 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 which of course is just a sack of crap. The Democrats are trying to make some hay with low information voters, suggesting that, the administration is in total disarray. Now, that can be true, and John Bolton going is also good, can be true simultaneously.
What's weird about this, first off, this is the day before 9/11. One of the architects of the Iraq War, and biggest advocates after 9/11, strange. Also, this is a former colleague of Tucker Carlson's. He's a Fox. I mean, that I find really strange. The dynamic between, pulling back the curtain between the Fox arguments and who Trump is taking his cues from.
Right. I mean, yesterday we saw Brian Kilmeade get an on-air text from Bolton saying the president, essentially the subtext of it saying, I resigned. The subtext being Donald Trump is lying about what happened. Tucker Carlson is part of the sort of like the Pat Buchanan school of conservatism, which is much less interested in foreign affairs and imposing democracy at the end of a gun, like a John Bolton is. And all I can tell you is that in 2004, at I guess it was the Republican, or maybe it was the Democratic National Convention in Boston. A guy comes up to me on Radio Row. They didn't know anything about Air America at the time. And he said, "You guys are liberals, is that right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Yeah, well, I'm not with this crew in the White House. I'm a Pat Buchanan conservative. These guys who are all doing these wars, they're all Jews." Oh. Right? And I was just like, I hear you, my man.
Valerie Plame voter?
Huh?
Valerie Plame's voter?
Very possible. So here, let's hear Tucker explain to us now how progressives are upset about John Bolton.
Tonight. It's because Bolton himself fundamentally was a man of the left. There was not a human problem John Bolton wasn't totally convinced could be solved with the brute force of government. That's an assumption of the left, not the right. Don't let the mustache fool you. John Bolton was one of the most progressive people in the Trump administration.
Well, I don't know what problems he's talking about. I mean, John Bolton was, his whole portfolio was foreign affairs. I don't know that Republicans have been restrained in their involvement in foreign affairs. I don't know if he's been aware of the fact that, we've had multiple wars in the past 2 decades, initiated by Republicans.
Is he doing a weird somersault where he defines interventionism as progressive?
I think it's big government. It's like his idea of big government is any spending that enhances the budget of the government, whether it's, and then he's equating that with progressives, saying, well, progressives like big government, not understanding, or of course he knows, he's very sophisticated, he knows this, that expanding the war budget is not something that progressives.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you look at the biggest slice of our budget and say that, which is driven by Republican interests. And to be fair, at times too much Democrats go along with it, but it's certainly driven by a Republican agenda. But there he is, Tucker Carlson, once again spreading the truth to his audience. Good for him. Meanwhile, folks, we just had a story about Joybird. You can tell the story too if you want, but
you can lead, and then I can.
So one of our sponsors today, Joybird Furniture, they have a place right around the corner. When they don't have too many brick and mortar places, but I go in there and I basically try out all the couches and just try.
He lives there now. I don't know if you guys know that.
Honestly,
he just sleeps there.
Extremely comfortable. With Joybird, you get one-of-a-kind furniture that's crafted after your unique taste. You want a sofa in aquatic blue or indigo, a love seat in the hottest red? If you can dream it, Joybird can make it a reality. From rich, buttery leather to the plushest velvet you've ever felt, find the fabric and the texture that's right for you. Joybird even offers a range of kid and pet-friendly upholstery options that stand the test of time. If they had a time machine and I could go back and get that stuff before my kids, Saul's on the tail end of destroying a couch. Plus, they have a free personal design consultant to help you nail down all the perfect design for you. And they have a 365-day home trial. Sit on it, sleep on it, break it in. If you don't love your Joybird, you return it for free within 2 weeks of delivery.
But I don't understand the 365-day trial.
If you don't love it, return it for free within 2 weeks. Oh, I guess you have a 365, maybe it's free within the first 2 weeks, and then after, I'm not 100% sure. But you can see how Joybird will help you design your dream space and make furniture your own at joybird.com/majority25. You were going to get a Joybird, right?
I ordered it. I designed it. They were making it. This was last year. And then, it wasn't expensive as other couches. They're really, really, really nice couches for the price. And then they were making it. And they were going to deliver it like in a week. And I decided, I'm going to run for office and not take an income for 6 months. I probably can't afford this. So I called them up and they said, no problem. We'll refund you the money. And I still want that couch.
There you go. Well, now you have the opportunity to take 25 off at joybird.com/majority25 to create the furniture that brings you joy today. Joybird.com/majority25 and get 25% off your first order by using the code majority25. That is the numeral. All right, let's, obviously today is 9/11. Last night, they had the Towers of Light that they sent up that they do every year. I don't know, you must have been like in high school.
I was my senior year of high school.
Jesus.
I think it was like the second day of school or third day of school.
Right, it would have been very close. I mean, the weather was very similar to today, actually. And I think I've mentioned in the past, I distinctly remember getting out of the shower, listening to Howard Stern at that time. Yes.
Wow.
They thought that everybody thought at the time it was a small plane that had gone in. A guy called into Howard Stern and said it was not a small plane. I saw a big tire. I lived at that point, had a bit of a sitcom money, so I had an apartment on 29th and Park. I went up to the roof and with my video camera, because of course I was also had about 14 different video cameras at the time, and basically videotaped the second plane coming in. I mean, I didn't see the plane. You couldn't see it from where I was because I was northeast of the towers. And so I only saw the explosion on the back end. And I had friends who lived down there. In fact, I went down there, John Benjamin lived on Duane Street at the time, and he had come up because obviously staying at my apartment because he couldn't go down there because the police had cordoned off everything below, at first 14th Street, and then I think it was Canal. And we rode, I think it must have been September 12th, and to get some of his stuff out. And there was literally like 2 or 3 inches of ash everywhere. And just random cars that had been pulled out of the area that were smashed. It was very strange. And then for months and months and months, you would hear processions that would go down 34th Street, coming from the pile, as it were, as they were pulling people out. And I lived right on the corner from a National Guard armory on Lex and 28th or something like that. Maybe it's 26th. I can't remember. And there was blocks of people had put posters up looking for missing loved ones. Very difficult time in New York City. But this, of all those things that happened, and obviously the horror, everyone was scared. I'm was convinced at the time. I still am convinced that had someone walked into Bloomingdale's with a stick of dynamite and blown themselves up, half of the New York City would have left because it was a very tense time. We had to my building on, like I say, on 28th or 29th and Park South had to be evacuated because there was the fear about the Empire State Building.
Wow. Because
just some rumor, and so everybody evacuated buildings.
Do you remember right after 9/11, like a month after, there was a plane that went down in Queens? It was pretty far out.
Yes. There was a lot of things that followed that. There was anthrax that followed that as well. There was can
I just tell a quick story? I was interning for Senator Schumer in Buffalo, New York, and the job of the interns back then was to open the actual physical mail. So we had to go through, they gave us what was the pill that they made us take?
What, to Ciprio or something?
Ciprio. I think that's what it was called. Can't remember. They made us take that and then put the gloves on and open up the mail. And it was...
Yeah, it was a tough time. And there was anthrax going around. I mean, part of that, it's unclear. Never found out who was sending the anthrax around. Really? But part of that, they suspected one scientist, but it turned out maybe after his death that it wasn't him. I'm not quite sure. It was, all of that was rolled up and used in a way that in many respects, obviously for those who lost loved ones, I mean, I go by a firehouse where at the 8:30 in the morning, essentially, when it ever exactly hit, they take a moment of silence. They lost a couple of guys out of that firehouse up in my part of Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. Obviously, a lot of tragedy on that day. But in terms of the country, you see stuff like killing hundreds of thousands of civilians in Iraq.
Right.
You the explosion of the drone and missile strike program that we have, torture that took place in Iraq,
or here.
spying spying, exactly. Jose Padilla, spying, who expanded the authorization for use of military force, which has become a sort of way of short-circuiting Congress's role in and what it did to our politics in many respects. I mean, there was obviously deep-seated problems, but for a couple of years, if you spoke out in any fashion, it was scary. I mean,
Bill Maher got his show canceled. Dixie Chicks.
Dixie Chicks had their records run over and burned. I could tell you that, having worked with Janine at that time in the run up to the war and after, she was multiple physical threats against her. It was an extremely ugly time.
I got picked on at school.
There you go. And
yet John Bolton still, in light of all that, still couldn't get confirmed.
Well,
shows you
exactly.
how crazy.
Exactly. And here is Rudy Giuliani, who I want to remind you before I show you this. Rudy Giuliani placed the command center, the emergency command center for New York City, against all of the advice from all of his advisors who were dealing with first responders and whatnot. They all told him, put it in Brooklyn. He didn't want to put it in Brooklyn. He didn't want to put it in Brooklyn because he was using it as a love shack, to have an affair with, and I like, it doesn't matter, whether his wife or not. I mean, that's not the reason why you put a command center in World Trade 7, in World Trade Center 7.
OG
and so here's a guy who made the response to what was going on far more dangerous for people. There was no communication. Communication had been destroyed at that point with guys in the towers, and then I think like his buddy Bernie Kerik, after they got the new apartment overlooking the pile, ended up using that for his affair. These are scumbags. And
they never go away. Bernie Kerik is another one.
Never go away.
Fox News contributor, that whole ecosystem.
Here is how Rudy Giuliani celebrated, and I do mean celebrate, because it's almost like a fascist holiday for them. You guys in North Carolina, the North Carolina Senate today did a sneak vote, 9/11 in the morning, knowing that people would be out, to overturn the governor's veto of their budget with barely half of their House full because people were out for, 9/11 ceremonies. Here is what Rudy Giuliani posted today.
Beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than love.
I mean,
is this the first purge? Like, what the hell?
Right.
I honestly, like,
paid for that.
How fascistic how much more fascistic could that be if you were trying to make it fascistic?
But what's his agenda there? I mean, he's under investigation right now. I don't understand what the point, other than Rudy Giuliani taking advantage of 9/11 every time it rolls around to remind people he was mayor. But who paid for this?
This is basically his vision that you have these people who are, this is their way of bashing the left. Listen, 9/11 was used to defeat guys like Max Cleland, who had lost multiple limbs in Vietnam by morphing him into bin Laden. This was the way they took power. And look, there's there was it's quite clear that they were asleep at the wheel. They did not take bin Laden as a threat very seriously. God knows, how the bin Laden folk knew that we were doing a training exercise that day, a similar training exercise, which was confusing to people. There's no doubt in my mind that people who worked, look, bin Laden was a CIA asset at one point. There's a lot of cross currents in there. At the very least, the negligence on the part of the Bush administration and George Bush himself, when he said, now you've covered your ass, when he saw that presidential warning. But for all that, the bottom line is they exploited the hell out of this. And they were incredibly opportunistic and much to the detriment of the country. And they continue to do it. It's just that Rudy Giuliani is an old guy. And I don't know how people receive this now. Normal human beings receive this now. But it's sick.
First off, kids don't watch TV. So that was, that one little part with the little kid watching a television. I'm like, oh, that's so
Well, no, that is set back. That was the idea was that cop who was there dropping his nightstick so he can go beat up these protesters. He's going back on the moments that brought him there.
Got it.
And it went back to when he got pinned as a cop. And then before that, he was in the military. And before that, he joined the military ostensibly, I guess, because he had seen the towers fall. And that's what he was watching on TV.
Do you think that was a paid placement from that apparel company and Giuliani's 9/11 tweet? Because that would just be the icing on the cake.
It could very well be. I don't understand. Where did this come from?
Yeah.
These guys, because I think they said that this was their Super Bowl commercial that wasn't allowed to air, but obviously they could not afford a Super Bowl spot.
Wow.
Interesting.
That is so
beer guarantee? Charitable giving, beer guarantee.
Grunt style.
Wow.
It's like fascist outfitters.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very sweet.
Freedom, bacon, and whiskey.
Hell
What?
yeah.
What if you just like one of those?
Or
two.
It's
style. What are we, Tim Allen?
It is really. You get all the different flavors that you want out of the right in this era.
Freedom, bacon, and whiskey.
It's a serious patina of fascism.
All right. Well, let's turn to what's going on. What took place in North Carolina's 9th last night. And I want to sort of tie this into what's going on with impeachment. I'll start with this. Here is AOC calling for an impeachment vote on the record, calling out Nancy Pelosi. And look, this is, regardless of what your opinion of impeachment is, and I think people know mine, when you start seeing stories like this in Politico, where they interview, 16 House Democrats in interviews offered conflicting assessments of the status of the House Judiciary Committee's investigation of Trump, which its chairman, Jerry Nadler, bills as, quote, an impeachment investigation. Here it is. We have been in the midst of an impeachment investigation, says Representative Pramila Jayapal, member of the Judiciary Committee. Quote, no, we're not in an impeachment investigation, end quote, says Representative Jim Himes, Connecticut, member of the House Intelligence Committee. Third, Representative Gregory Meeks said the House is investigating to determine, quote, whether or not there should be an impeachment investigation. Like, there's no value in this. And I said this yesterday, but it bears repeating. The founding fathers contemplated a Donald Trump.
Right.
That is why they have a method to impeach someone like Donald Trump. What they did not contemplate was someone like Nancy Pelosi, who is in the opposition party, who just basically says, he definitely deserves it. Every day we see new law breaking. They should have impeached him just on the attempt to reappropriate money to the wall.
Right.
There's so many, and she knows it. She thinks there's political benefit in not. And here's AOC disagreeing with that premise.
I want to see every Republican go on the record and knowingly vote against impeachment of this president, knowing his corruption, having it on the record so that they can have that stain on their careers for the rest of their lives, because this is outrageous. To protect the amount of lawlessness and corruption coming out of this presidency.
Do you want the speaker to take that message?
Any message that works, I would like them to take up that message. But personally, I think that it is beyond time, and we have to end this lawlessness and corruption coming out of the White House.
I mean, she's right. And, we saw this. This to me ties into this North Carolina race. Obviously, this is a district that Donald Trump won by 12% in 2016. I think Mitt Romney, similar amount, 12% in 2016. This is a very red district. The Democrat missed it by 2 percentage points. It was 1,000 votes last time, and a significant number of those votes we know were fraudulent. Mm-hmm. But what the Republicans did, McCready, the Democrat, was able to bring out more of his voters, just not enough to overcome the fact that Bishop, the Republican, brought out even more rural voters. Right. Because Donald Trump shows up there.
And they do better traditionally in special elections. Erase the last couple of cycles where there's been a revived Democratic base on the progressive side organizing, and even, Democrats in these special elections. Republicans traditionally have an edge when they get their shit together and start to organize. So even when the Democratic Party invests so much money into what I think is a very 2004-esque candidate,
right.
A young, veteran, an entrepreneur, was he a lawyer too? Went to Harvard and Yale and Harvard and Duke, I think. Very cookie cutter. Even with that, they put everything into it, and they still couldn't, overrun the Republicans, who just have a natural edge.
Well, they have a natural edge, but here's also, I think, the thing that is not natural. You have all these people coming out because they're supporting Donald Trump,
right? And
the vast majority of people who are voting against Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And if that's the formula, you've got to go out there and give this candidate an opportunity. Now, he basically said, I would not vote for Nancy Pelosi, et cetera, et cetera. But this seems to me to be indication that there isn't necessarily enough people who are going to be motivated by your coming up there and saying, I am just slightly more moderate version of this guy.
Exactly.
People are not looking for moderation. They have their opinions. They're just looking for the person who can convince them, that the candidate that can convince them that I'm going to act on your opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And
you can't compromise with someone like this. And this is what drives me mad with the Democrats is, we were talking about polarization. Yes, our country is polarized. You have Nazis who have invaded the White House and John Bolton's, and then you have the Democrats being like, well, we need to compromise and have people in the middle. You want to compromise with a Nazi? You want to compromise somebody with an oligarchy, with monopolies? That hasn't worked in the last 20 years. And I think in places like North Carolina, I don't know if you've gone there at all, but there's a real populism there. Even in Charlotte, larger cities, there's a real populism in cities, in rural communities. And if the Democrats are continuing with this cookie cutter approach, I just don't think they're going to be able to go over the edge. We saw it with Ossoff.
Yes.
Same thing.
Yes. And I see him running for governor in Georgia, and that's a little bit scary in that respect. I mean, I think the bottom line too, it seems to me, and, I've been, following a little bit of this woman. Her name it's Rachel Bitkofer. She was a statistician who predicted the 2018 blowout very, very early in the cycle. And, there's some things that I don't necessarily subscribe to that she suggests, but one thing I think that she makes a very good case is that partisanship, you need to play into the partisanship, mm-hmm. because you have one side that is using partisanship to its full potential, mm-hmm. and the other side that is not, and they can't.
Right.
I'm not even convinced necessarily that you need to have a specific ideological set of plans, but whatever they are, they have to be in opposition to Donald Trump and the Republicans as they stand today. And that and clouding that, the fact that you stand on one side of the divide and convincing your voters, because there are no sort of like lean Democrat, lean Republican voters. They are either I lean Democrat or I lean Republican. And who's going to motivate me? Who's going to inspire those reasons why I already lean for those people, as opposed to I could go either way.
And also just, I think the way that we define voters in America is just dated. You know, the middle voters, well, what does that mean? What does that actually mean? Are they conservative on some issues? I mean, my dad said it the other day. He's a Bernie voter. And he said, well, you know, I'm socially progressive and I'm economically conservative. And I said, well, how? I don't understand that. Could you explain it to me? And he realized after, he's a lawyer, he broke down the argument, because I don't know. I just always thought that because the media sort of portrayed it that way. And I think that's really what this is about. When you go down into rural North Carolina, which is not necessarily this district, but if you go into the rural areas, you'll meet people who hear Bernie Sanders' message, and they don't, this big government idea, it's confusing to them for the same reasons that we were saying earlier. It's, you know, what does big government mean? Does it mean I get health care? Okay, I really don't want to be paying so much for my health care right now, or I can't afford it, or I'm a small business owner and I would much prefer to pay, you know, to have Medicare for all so we're not losing so much money. I mean, I think that we're just defining them based on social issues and ignoring the economic issues. And this is where I think that even with polling, things get really flawed.
Yeah, this is the thing. Speaking of polling, there's a poll out today in Texas. They did a lot of polls apparently the past week or so in Texas, and
pollsters made their money.
Yes, and you made the point that, like, you know, by the time we get to Texas, there's going to be a whole lot of other factors that are going to determine people's perception of the candidates, right? I mean, I think particularly Joe Biden is most susceptible to this. If he loses Iowa and New Hampshire, the narrative is going to be like, maybe this guy can't win. And that's the biggest thing that he's got going for him. But so in Texas, we have polling that shows that it's very strange, it seems to me. Joe Biden leads the Democratic presidential race in two Texas polls. Biden's at about 28% in two different polls. One's 28, one's 26. Then Warren, she's at 18 in both of them. And then in one, it's O'Rourke, but then one, it's Bernie Sanders.
His state.
Right.
Give it to him.
Right. And
Beto.
But so here it is. So Bernie comes in fourth in both, or third or fourth in both these, in terms of who would get your vote in a Democratic presidential primary today. Now, again, that's today, and what happens in the primary race may impact that. But then there's another poll that shows that Univision, Bernie Sanders doing best in a hypothetical head-to-head matchup against Trump in Texas. Again, you know, who knows? But leading Trump 48-42. Biden is more or less the same, 47-43. Warren a little bit less, but, you know, statistically not terribly different, 44-42. I mean, that suggests to me that there is more strength in a general election for Democrats than most Democrats think.
Right.
And I think ultimately that's going to hurt Joe Biden, right? You tell me.
I believe so. I mean, this is somebody who's been wishy-washy on his stance on the Iraq War just recently in the last week, which you know, blew me away. How are you going to be able to have an alternate vision other than just speaking to the Rust Belt, which is, I think, his entire campaign strategy is, you know, down home Joe speaking to the Rust Belt.
Yeah, but only in the most shallow and pandering of ways,
course,
right? Like, he's not speaking to their class interests at all.
Right. He's not talking about policy. He's running a campaign as if, this is my issue with Democrats, is that they're too quick to hyper-react to 4 years ago. The country shifts, especially with millennials, shifts dramatically in social media, and this idiot, Trump, it's shifted quite a bit in the last 3 years. And so I don't personally even know if the Rust Belt is going to be as powerful as it was last time, this time around. Maybe
Right.
Texas will be more powerful. But again, it really comes down to this primary process. It's New Hampshire, it's Iowa, possibly New York State if the governor has his way, moving the primary date.
What do you make about that? This was announced, I guess, the other day that Cuomo's trying to move it up to February. He's also, it's obviously a big protection racket for incumbents in the state.
If it's matched with the
state elections,
which
right.
is one of the options from what I understand. But it's it's presidential primary.
So what is he thinking? What is Cuomo?
Yeah.
I know that his agenda has to be something that I would not like.
There's always like 15 layers of Andrew Cuomo in his thought process. The other side of it is there was an article, I think yesterday, saying a lot of incumbent state lawmakers who are running for Congress, a couple, would lose their positions, would likely lose their seats if they're running simultaneously because of the primary dates would switch.
And
really
they would be
confusing.
hurt by earlier
By design.
primaries?
Yes.
Because ostensibly the challengers have a not as wide, but a deeper connection to their followers, and people who are pissed will come out as opposed to, or what?
I
What's
think
the
it's also
theory
just a
behind it?
legal technicality. If you're running for Congress and the primary for Congress is in June of next year, or whatever the date is, but it's usually around then. And the legislative primary is in February, if that's moved to that, because they're always different. In New York, we like to make things complicated so that voters don't turn out in an overwhelmingly Democratic state. God forbid the Democratic Party get its base out.
Right. So wait, I don't understand. How would people in Congress lose?
Not in Congress. So, for instance, there's an open seat right now in the Bronx, right? And there's a state lawmaker who's running. He's an assemblyman, Michael Blake. He's also a vice chair of the DNC, and that his case was made in that if his primary were in February and he lost it, meaning like he'd be running for Congress and he can't run simultaneously.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see. So it would hurt those sitting state reps in their attempts to run for Congress. I see.
Which is also, everything in New York, at least on the Senate side, is down to a couple of votes, always, for the last, 15 years. But we had the IDC,
right,
which blocked. So that works to Cuomo's favor. Like, he wants to be able to take care of some people in Michigan. Like, for instance, Blake is a perfect example because while he is more establishment, he has not gotten along with the Bronx machine. And the Bronx machine is really important for Cuomo. But we're getting into the New York, but all politics is local. What we saw with AOC was more about local politics in New York, in my opinion, than having an extraordinary voice in Congress representing progressives.
Right. I don't think people were voting on that in New York. They wanted to get rid of Crowley and
who was the Queen's boss machine.
So, all right. So why would Cuomo move up the presidential primary?
I think there's a bunch of reasons. There's a lot of delegates in New York. They're not really selected democratically, like maybe other states, like Iowa, for instance.
So he thinks that's going to help Biden.
Yeah, it'll probably help Biden. It's a closed primary. It's the most closed primary in the entire country in terms of Democratic primaries. There have been some voting reform laws passed, but he has not signed them, like automatic voter registration.
So he wants to make sure that he can control the electorate, and he thinks that maybe if it's hung out there longer, he'll have less control over who shows up at the polls.
Yeah. So if it's between Iowa and New Hampshire, that's crazy. And California's primary has been moved up as well. It's a more open primary.
Yep.
They're not New York by any means, but New York. I think he also just wants New York to be important again. I believe that Bernie Sanders' election ended in New York in April last time around, but it was also because it was an extremely close primary. You had to be registered as a Democrat over a year in advance if you were switching parties. And so we have so many independents here, especially young people who are Bernie Sanders supporters, that couldn't change their party registration. And we have a really archaic, Board of Elections system, so people's votes get lost all the time.
That is why I register as a Democrat in New York for a long time.
Public service announcement.
I want
Do it now.
to choose. Yeah, exactly.
Do it now.
If you want to be able to if you can stomach the idea that somebody could find out that you're registered as a Democrat, but you want to have a voice
Right.
in determining who of the two most viable candidates,
Right.
the more to the leftward one is going to be. You got to register as a Democrat, and
Yo, to all you ultra leftists who think you're too cool to register as a Democrat, I'm registered as a Democrat, and I am extremely cool.
There you go. I mean, honestly,
I am, and I hate the party.
But it really, I mean,
they hate me.
You're half joking, but you're not.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing, is like the idea that it's like it wouldn't be cool for me to be a Democrat. Like, there is nothing else that is involved with registering as a Democrat, in New York at least, other than you get the opportunity to vote in the Democratic primary.
Taking it, to another, we're not an open primary state, meaning if you're registered as a Democrat, you can vote Democrat in a Democratic primary. But if you're registered under another party, like Green Party, for instance, you can't.
Right.
And the Green Party and other third parties, they rely on having people registered and voting on their party line. But that doesn't mean you don't have to be registered as a Democrat in the Democratic primary. Meaning, if you're going to vote on that party line in the general election, you can still vote on that party line.
I don't think I've voted for a Democrat in the general election under the Democratic line in any race, any time, unless that's the only party line they're on. But more often than not, it's WFP. Right. And I will vote on the WFP line. At one point, I asked those folks, like, is it good for me to register as a Democrat? And they're like, no, don't register as a Democrat. Excuse me. They said, yes, register as a Democrat. Don't register as a Working Families Party member. Right. Just vote on our line.
Right.
Because that's what determines, what empowers us.
In the general.
In the general election.
In the general, because you can't do that in the primary.
You can't do that in primary because they don't, first of all, they don't have primaries in the Working Families Party or in most of the other parties. There's no value in it. Right. You can vote on any line you want. Right. And it's just I think it's a very simple thing, but like understanding that and sort of being able to sort of swallow, like, I don't get to say that I'm not registered as a Democrat. Right. And I understand the value of that. I mean, certainly I understand the value of it. But the value of registering as a Democrat is that you actually get to exert some tiny, tiny modicum of power in that election.
And that's why they don't want you to be able to register.
Right.
So stick it to them. You have until October 11th, if this primary date isn't changed, to change your registration. Go to the Board of Elections, New York Board of Elections website, print out the form, sign it, you have to sign it, and mail it, because we don't do things easily in New York.
So, all right, I just want to just hammer home this point one more time about North Carolina. Right. Here's a clip of Dan Bishop. He is the new congressman from North Carolina's 9th District. Incidentally, the 9th District may not be the 9th District come 2020. So he's there for about a year and a half, maybe, or a year and change. I would imagine this district is going to change like others. And, when you win by 2 percentage points, and when you're talking about a presidential election where Democrats tend to come out more, a slight change in the composition of this district, and that Democrat has a very good shot.
Before we play the clip, do you know what the legislature makeup is and who oversees redistricting? Well,
they just had a major case in North Carolina, and right now I can show you who's in charge of redistricting. Bring this up. A state superior court in North Carolina a week ago invalidated the state lines there. I think in part because they realized that the more information was coming out from this godfather of the gerrymandering, this guy Hofstadter, who had all the documents on his hard drives that his daughter had basically revealed. And it was quite clear that these districts were not only extremely partisan gerrymandered, but they were done so based on race. And so these were going to be struck down. The Republicans have not fought it. Instead, what they've done, and I don't think this is as nefarious as it looks. They apparently ran 100 or 1,000 different potential plans through a computer. They got the top 5. Democrats do have an issue with some of the algorithms that there was used to determine this. But here in the North Carolina Senate is how they picked which of the 5 they were going to do. They brought in their lottery machine. Go ahead, run this.
I'll just say, okay, if you're ready, then go ahead and activate the machine.
So they have 5 plans, 5 balls, and this is how they're, you want to know how they're going to, there it is. And that's how they're going to pick their maps, at least in the Senate. But here is Dan Bishop. And this is what I was saying about, you have polarization. You have hyperpartisanship. You can either participate in it or lose. Mm-hmm. I think that's the only 2 choices. When they do it, it has to be met, because anybody who is not attracted to this is attracted to voting against Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to sell that hard. And I don't think McCready quite did, but here is Bishop.
We've all watched as the Democratic Party the Socialist Democrat Party
You had to get in the Democrat.
seeks the president's destruction every day. We've seen a dishonest media.
He's laughing. He can't even believe he's saying this.
Serve as their handmaidens and their allies in that mission. We've watched as the greatest fighter ever to occupy the White House has pushed them all off.
I mean, the bottom line is, if you're a Trump fan, if you're in any way offended by, the an attack on Donald Trump, you're going to vote for that guy. Mm-hmm. So you've got to go after your people by saying, we're going to go after Trump. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that happened as much as it should have in that race.
You know what I would love to see is Democrats pay for a mailer that goes to Republicans with a quote of Nancy Pelosi saying, "We are not a socialist party."
It's not gonna. I mean, well, but that's their.
Yeah,
but that's
capitalist, and that's just the way it is.
Right.
But that is their theory. Is that somehow that's going to move Republican voters, and it's not.
Right.
They're just going to go like, well, I'm still going to go and vote. Like it's a complete misread of. It really gets down to the difference between it being a persuasion election versus a mobilization election.
Although I do think that there is something clicking with an older voters. I don't know if I necessarily totally agree on this, because I have family in Arizona, and they hate Trump. They hate Trump, and they identify as independent Republicans, like McCain. I mean, there's a lot of that in Arizona.
Right.
And one of my family members called me up recently, and she's a Democrat, and she's in a family of Republicans, and she says, I just don't know what to think about AOC. I'm listening to all my friends, and they think that she is bringing communism to America. And I go, well, do you know what communism is? And then, and I do think that there's an era of voters that do turn out in these primaries and do turn out in special elections that are the Fox News viewers, that are not our Democratic base, that are not, in Brooklyn and the Bronx and want impeachment right away. And they really are scared of socialism. I mean, I hear it on NPR with hosts on NPR bring this up.
No, I mean, I agree. I agree with that concept. That they're afraid, and I do think that is, it's a tough hill to climb. Like, I'm not sure I would have chosen to sort of make that DSA speech that Bernie did at the beginning.
DSA member, and I don't know if I agree with that either.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that would have been my agenda. Right. I think to educate the populace on this at that point it's a hard road to. I'm much more interested in the policies. I don't care what you call it. Yep. And I think the right has a machine and is much better. Like, you just look at the polling, more Republicans know who AOC is than Democrats. They have been very successful in defining. That's why, you have relatives in Arizona who are like, she's a communist, because I saw it on Fox News and I hear it on and particularly as you get into the center of the country, it's dominated by conservative media. And
what's the class position of these relatives in Arizona, would you say?
Position?
Yeah.
Mixed, but I would say that, probably it's Arizona. So middle class Arizona.
Okay. Because there's
working middle class.
Yeah. Because there are some people who are scared of the word because they grew up in the Cold War era. And then there are some people who are scared of the word and the policies because it will involve paying more in taxes.
I don't think they're that sophisticated in their analysis. I mean, and I'm also looking at their Facebook walls. I don't block your family members who are Republicans, because to me it is fascinating to see the fights on their walls and where their lines are, because there are some Republicans that are anti-Trump or critical, don't like his style, but will still vote for him. And I want to know exactly what that spectrum is, because those are the people I think that we can move, just as if, they're moving.
But are those the people, but can we though? I mean, because because there's a cost associated with trying to move them.
Yes, my uncle's a Republican who hates Trump and is going to vote for a Democrat. Doesn't matter who it is. He told me, he goes, get your party together, like he, sophisticated DNC analysis that he is. He's like, get your party together, because there's too many candidates and you're all going to eat each other alive, and Trump is taking advantage of that.
Right. All right. So that guy's he's off the board. He's going to vote for the Democrat. But I'm saying and he's going to do it because he hates Trump.
Right.
So he's a Trump hater. I mean, put aside with the idea is you don't have to persuade that guy. Anything you do, anything that you do to attempt to persuade that guy is going to cut against the other end of your party.
Right.
And I just don't think that those people are persuadable, as much as there are some there and there are some not.
Right.
And the return on investment in using persuasion is less, it seems to me, than the return on investment in getting people who are already basically agree with you, but don't necessarily feel moved. And that is a very broad, that's a very broad category. What it takes to move people. For some, I think it's just sort of visceral stuff. For others, it might be more policy oriented. For some, I think it's just sort of we're going to impeach the guy. We're going to put him in chains. You could go out there and say, we're just going to put him in chains afterwards. And that might motivate people. I mean, I think, but whatever moves them on some type of visceral level,
right?
It's really less about persuading them of what side of the divide they're on, and more persuading them of the stakes that are involved in that vote. And I think that's why when we had people staying at home in Wisconsin, aside from the voter suppression, or in Michigan or in Pennsylvania, I think it wasn't so much that they didn't agree with the policy sets of Hillary Clinton.
Couldn't do it for Hillary.
Go at, when we'll talk about this AB 5, which is a big deal, and it, Uber and Lyft and TaskRabbit and whatever it is, $5, Fiverr. I don't know if Fiverr is doing that, but those gig economy things they're freaking out because people are going to have to get are going to be classified as employees. That means that they're going to be put into the Social Security system. It means that they're going to have workers' comp coverage. That means that they're going to have unemployment insurance. And we will talk more about that. That's going to have implications across the country, I think. In the meantime, just a reminder, this program relies on your support. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you get extra content every day. Did we ever put up that Hannity thing?
I believe so, yes.
So in your members feed, there should be extra
If not,
bonus.
it will be done today because I'm uploading.
There you go. Wait, that didn't. You got to do that. You got to do my board. There you go. So jointhemajorityreport.com. Don't forget justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. Get 10% off. And the AM Quickie. It's in your Majority Report audio podcast feed. Just go on to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe to the Majority Report feed, and you will get the AM Quickie we're just a couple of weeks away from it living on its own. I think we found some logos, right?
Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
Very close. Very, very close. Michael's not here today, but you can go check out TMBS. It's on iTunes and at patreon.com/TMBS and YouTube. He had a big show last night. And Jamie, the Antifada.
Yeah, this week on the Antifada, we speak with our friend Sophie St. Thomas, who is a sex and weed journalist. Pretty cool job.
Yeah.
About my trip to LA, hurricane sex, pickup artist magic, relationship boardigism, and I got her take on Alexandra Kolontais' celebrated essay, Make Way for Winged Eros, a letter to working youth. I also want to plug the article that I wrote on the DSA convention. If you haven't read it yet, you should. It's in Commune Magazine. So go to communemag.com and check it out. It's called When the Wave Crashes. Also, we're doing a live show October 12th at Littlefield, so come to that. Also, Close the Camps NYC is doing a direct action this weekend, and they need way more people. So if you're interested in that, go to closethecampsnyc.com.
And we'll put those links in the podcast feed.
Indeed.
And Nomi, join us for the fun half.
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
Where I'm going to be announcing my podcast called Hurricane Sex.
There you go.
What?
I feel like that would sell.
Yeah, I probably would.
We'll be right back. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238. 56, 27, 1/2, 5 eighths, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Grandpa.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabs.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we are back, ladies and gentlemen. It is the fun half of the Majority Report. I'm going to turn the IM machine on right now because I keep forgetting to do that. And I haven't done IMs in a while. And
Do you still call them IMs?
Well, I actually take IMs.
It's like an actual, not AIM.
Not A. No, not.
Yeah, what's your screen
AOL
name?
Instant Manage. What's that?
What's your screen name? What's your AIM name?
I think it's majority.fm. I don't know what it is.
Not
It's
like
through the app.
Apple Guy 69.
My original email address was something like that. I don't want to say because I don't want to, but it was because when we got email, I mean, I'm old. When we got email, we didn't know what it was.
Right.
Like we didn't know, like, where's this technology going? Is this going to be like my social security number? And so everybody put up, things that they could remember, but that other people couldn't tell it was them, because at that time we didn't realize that every part of our lives would be broadcast and we wouldn't be, basically inviting the entire world into whatever we're doing and then marketing it and monetizing it. So, I mean, had we known at the time, I would have started in the ground running.
Branded early.
Same.
Exactly. I have already reserved all my kids, though, websites.
This is a thing now. It's like
Sure.
a real, like, congratulations, just your baby shower. I've bought their domain names.
That's a
and
good
their
idea.
street names and
That's
their
actually a good idea.
Instagrams.
Yeah.
Can you imagine your entire life being on Instagram?
No, that's horrifying.
Yeah, I have a friend who has a baby and they have an Instagram right now.
Wow.
Oh, God. I have a friend who has a little kid who she will not post on social media. She always blocks out his face. And I respect that because it seems like it should be something you opt into.
Oh yeah, no, I wouldn't even let my kid do it. I mean, or for herself either. But yes, no, I agree with that. But I mean, I was also a little bit nervous. So let's go into this with we were talking about, and Warren's got his. Warren is, had a bump. I mean, she's going through a little bit of a surge right now, and it's been interesting because, to a large extent, the Biden people in particular seem to be very, very nervous about her. I don't get the sense that Bernie's people are as nervous about her at this point. I think the idea is that, like, they want, I think, the election to be between, two people to the left of Joe Biden, frankly. Right. But Biden definitely seems worried about it. His people announced the other day that they're going to be talking about her corporate the payments, and which now you've worked in a bunch of campaigns, you've run for office. Do you communicate a couple of days beforehand to your opponent, like what you're going to be attacking them on? Does that?
Oh no, no. Although I wish they probably wished so.
Right. Well, I mean, what is Biden doing there? Is he trying to is it just a way to sort of get that idea out there?
My only thought is maybe they were preventing an attack. There was something coming out from Warren's team, and it was like a little bit of a threat that, oh, honey, you're not, honey.
Right.
Speaking in Biden voice, come on, guys.
Exactly.
That's how he talks.
Of course, actually.
That's probably how he thinks.
It's exactly how he thinks.
I mean, he said kid to Kamala Harris.
Right.
So, that be careful, we have stuff too. I mean, everybody has stuff on each other, and they don't always use it, and oftentimes they wait until the perfect moment, and there's also false information they can put out there. But I don't know if the corporate base, I mean, the attack that they said that they were going to use is that we're going to expose that you used to work for corporations or something like that, like your corporate employees. Which I don't know if that's a substantial. I mean, would you attack somebody? It depends on what they did, of course. Like if they represented corporations for fraud.
If I was Joe Biden, I wouldn't use that attack because that's part of probably the allure that I project to some of my voters anyways. I have a feeling it may be part of like a sort of a broader narrative to say that she's disingenuous in some fashion. Yeah. But here's Jim Cramer on CNBC, and then we'll get a chance to pick up more on this. Here's Jim Cramer on CNBC. They're already starting on CNBC to talk about the doom and gloom if the Democrats win. In particular, Elizabeth Warren. And they're talking about Wells Fargo. Just a reminder, folks. Wells Fargo, in addition to all the stuff involved in the companies that they bought that were involved in the sort of the massive fraud that existed in foreclosures and the run up to the 2008 financial crisis, Wells Fargo since that time has had literally thousands of their own employees place people. I don't even know how to express this. You go in, you get a bank account. They take your info and without you knowing it, sell you other products that the bank is selling and you get billed for it. And if you're lucky, you notice. If you're not lucky, you don't. And Wells Fargo was just like, maybe we were a little bit over ambitious with our workers, guilty, but we didn't tell them to do this. One would think that you would have controls in there that like you need maybe a signature or something. But here is Jim Cramer talking about how scared they are if Elizabeth Warren gets in.
But how is it possible that this company cannot find a CEO? I mean, are they worried about Elizabeth Warren attacking that? She or he would be.
Of course they are, and of course that person is. Why wouldn't they be?
I don't know.
If she becomes president, what do you think is going to happen to the banks?
Pause it. Let me just be clear on what happened here. Jim Cramer is making a joke.
Yeah.
Right? He's making a joke about like, why can't Wells Fargo find a CEO? Now, I would guess it's probably because somebody's going like, I don't want to go in there because every other day it seems like they find massive amounts of criminality in the company, and I don't want to be overseeing that type of stuff.
Or be held accountable for that.
Exactly.
Brought into courts.
And so Cramer doesn't know how to respond when this guy goes, yeah, that is why they're afraid of God.
If she becomes president, what do you think is going to happen to the banks?
Well, it would be a suboptimal situation for the banks.
Right. You think Elizabeth Warren pushes banks into it? Well, they're already down 20% from the highs, but...
Yeah, I just think that there were these hearings in the 30s where they brought rich people in front of Congress and just kind of trashed them. It was effective.
Well, about 20 years later, we had the least discrepancy in incomes in the 50s and 60s, all right?
I don't know what's going to happen. Look, I've got to tell you, when you get off the desk and you talk to executives, they're more fearful of her winning. I mean, I've never heard anybody say, look, she's got to be stopped. She's got to be stopped. I don't know. She's very, she keeps going up in the polls.
She's raised a ton of money.
She's going to win Iowa, I believe. She's a very compelling figure on the stump.
By the way, I hear it too, and it's another reason why companies are being implored to do things now. If you want to get something done,
you really think
M&A or anything, think about doing it soon, because come early to mid 2020, if Elizabeth Warren's rolling along, everybody's going to be like, that's it.
So you're hearing it too?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
and I'll have what he's having.
Well, I mean, if I'm Elizabeth Warren, I cut that into an ad for me.
Trump's friend, Jim Cramer, nonetheless.
Is Cramer friends with Trump?
He is always praising him and tweets.
It's very strange.
What I don't
anyone
understand
really
here
friends
is,
with Trump?
If they're on TV, they're friends with Trump. This is NBC. NBC has a long relationship with Trump in some way or form. And right. I find it, I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, but there's like a lot of Warren praising on NBC. And I watched, unfortunately, all weekend, I watched NBC and barely heard Bernie's name. Wouldn't they also be scared of Bernie?
One would think that they would be scared of Bernie, but Bernie has always been ignored in this way. I mean, I've told this story many times, but I got a call in the run-up of 2016 election in the spring of 2015 from a reporter from Politico who was doing a piece on Martin O'Malley. And he says to me, he calls and he says, look, I'm doing this piece on Martin O'Malley. Martin O'Malley wants to know how he can get progressives, how he can, compete with Elizabeth Warren for progressives. And I was like, Elizabeth Warren's not running for election. Bernie Sanders is. He's got to worry about Bernie Sanders. And the guy just laughed.
Oh, but it's Politico.
Well, but the point is, I think, at CNBC, they have the same attitude.
Yeah.
Like it's completely, and probably NBC, broadly speaking, it is unfathomable to them.
Is it, or is it a direction? I mean, the way these networks, we've both worked for networks and do, there is actual editorial direction given that's passed down. Like, we're going to cover this story. We're not covering this story. We're going to talk about these people. There's the graphics. I mean, I think some of it is a little bit of like inner, establishment beltway mentality. But then I think some of it is actually very intentional.
I would be surprised if there were directives that were specifically, we're going to not cover Bernie Sanders, whatnot. I think it's just, honestly, the vast majority of those people there just think in one way. That's why they're there. That if they thought a different way, they just wouldn't get through the hiring process.
That's true.
Just because it's like, I don't want that freak in here. And so I just think it just doesn't even they just don't take him seriously.
Right.
Even now, after you look at the entire campaign sort of organized around his issue sets, they still don't take him seriously. And I think that's probably not a bad place for Bernie to be in at this point in the race, right? I mean, because the difference between 2020 and 2016 at this juncture is that Bernie takes his chances more seriously. And he did not in when we were in 2015, I guess it would have been is the equivalent. And in September 2015, I don't think Bernie Sanders thought I'm in this race to win. I think he's like, I'm in this race to make it clear about income inequality and money that has corrupted our political process. And I don't think he had a real agenda to win until 5 months later, 4 months later. And that was a little bit too late. I think that's the big difference right now is that maybe he's being overlooked by the national media. That's fine because they're building something on the ground, I would think.
Oh, yeah. And my hope is that there's a feedback effect there because people want to pick a winner. People don't want to be wasting their time. So hopefully the more Bernie thinks he can win, the more other people will, and the more people will volunteer and do the whole not me, us thing to make sure there's actually a grassroots movement behind him.
Speaking of grassroots, there's meanwhile, the Senate machine to just crank in right-wing justices for lifetime appointments on federal courts. Remember, Donald Trump is already, I think, the most successful in placing his judges on the federal court. And the most recent who has been sped through, and your good friend Chuck Schumer made multiple deals to allow this to go through quick.
Do not hold that against me. I was 16 years old.
Well, it's hard.
It was
hard,
an
but I'll do my
internship
best.
for a semester.
Chuck Schumer has done, as far as I can tell, absolutely nothing to stop this relentless onslaught of right-wing judges. And there's a limited amount in what he could do, frankly. It's just that he could slow the roll somewhat. And at the very least, he could just make an effort, which would make people feel like he's making an effort. The latest judge is this guy, Stephen Menashe. He's a legal aide to Donald Trump. He has incredible hostility for women, as far as I can tell, for folks of color, for LGBTQ. He's a 40-year-old lawyer, clerked for Sam Alito, served as acting general counsel for Betsy DeVos, wrote dozens of incendiary editorials and blog posts in the late 90s and early 2000s decrying leftist multiculturalism and PC orthodoxy. He's going to be a federal judge, folks. He complained about gynocentrists.
Oh, what is that?
You're just it's like, I think you see the whole world through your vagina, essentially.
Oh, okay.
Everywhere.
Penis centrists?
Penile centrists. Right.
That's better.
He said that he complained that gynocentrists were participating in the Take Back the Night marches. The Take Back the Night marches are marches that are essentially anti-rape marches. They're trying to raise awareness that women shouldn't be afraid to go out at night for getting raped.
So polarizing.
Yes. Wow. So PC.
So, wow.
He accused the Human Rights Campaign of having to, quote, incessantly exploiting the slaying of Matthew Shepard, who was a young guy who was killed because he was gay. He claimed that a Dartmouth fraternity wasn't being racist when it held a, quote, ghetto party attended by white party goers wearing afros and carrying toy guns. Some of his past writings include him comparing race data collection in college admissions to Germany under Adolf Hitler, denouncing women's marches as sexual assault,
What?
opposing the radical abortion rights advocated by campus feminists and codified in Roe v. Wade, arguing that diverse communities, quote, exhibit less political and civic engagement, less effective government institutions, and fewer public goods. He opposed need-based financial aid because it hurt wealthy people.
Oh my God.
And he was also...
Please. People of means.
He also, exactly. People struck with affluenza. He also spread the myth, the Islamophobic myth that Donald Trump did as well, that General John Pershing executed Muslim prisoners in the Philippines in 1913 with bullets dipped in pig fat. Yeah. And he's horrible. We have protesters, though, going, and not just protesting Republicans, because of course, but people like Chris Coons, Democratic senator from Delaware, who has talked about how we need to bring back the filibuster if Democrats take the Senate for judicial picks. And also Susan Collins, who, of course, I'm sure is just absolutely upset about this guy, and we'll have to vote for him.
Back down on Brown. We won't 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 back down.
Now, they're yelling, we won't back down on Brown, because what right-wing justices have now done is they are refusing to say if Brown v. Board of Education, the ruling that basically said separate but equal is not equal, was correctly decided.
That's so bad.
It's unbelievable.
Civil Rights Act.
Yep.
Brown v. Board.
Let's go to the phones.
What do you expect from Betsy DeVos's counsel?
Right, of course.
We can't take these things for granted.
No. Calling for a 605 area code. Who's this? Where are we calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Dylan from Wyoming.
Dylan from Wyoming. What's on your mind?
Yeah. You guys tend to have discussions with folks that, to put it generally, lie politically to your right. I was wondering if you'd be interested in having a discussion with somebody who lies politically to your left.
Sure. I mean, I think I do that, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No. I'm not saying you don't do it. But basically, what I wanted to call in about is something that's been bugging me. Basically, I don't think it's reasonable to say that there is a feasible path to justice through the mechanism of our liberal democracy. And that's basically my thesis. And then I have several, points that I can use to back that up.
Okay. Let's hear 'em.
So basically, yeah. So you were just talking about how the judicial wing of our government is not going to be within the reach of liberal, much less leftist, goals or aims for the next 20 years, probably.
I mean, I think that's...
And any... What?
I think there's a very strong case that you're correct in that. Yes.
But since these guys are all pedophiles, they might just get caught and have to step down. So.
Right.
well, God willing.
Right.
So that brings us to, that's 1/3 of the government that we can't use, right? In order to achieve our goals.
Correct.
We probably agree on most things. So, the legislative branch is, it's reasonable that we'll hold the House. It's possible that Democrats can take the Senate.
Correct.
But even Bernie Sanders, as of yet, does not oppose the filibuster directly.
Right.
So it's less likely that those levers of power will be open to progressive goals. And I would make the contention that if Bernie Sanders is elected president, which I believe is very possible and it's something we should aspire toward, but it doesn't make sense that, or rather, I would postulate that the filibuster will remain in place if and only if Bernie Sanders is elected, because the people that he is going to be opposed to politically are more likely going to be Democrats than Republicans in terms of the actual passing of legislation.
Well, I know what you're saying. Yes. Okay, let me stipulate this so that we can move this along. I think yes,
sure.
For the sake of this argument, the court system definitely going to be an adversary to progressive change at the very least for 20 years. If Bernie Sanders becomes president, the absence or the inclusion, it's more likely that the filibuster will be there because it's a perfect cover for Democrats who want to thwart his agenda. And so, okay, with all that stipulated, go make your case.
Yeah. So, in order for there to be any meaningful change for, I would say probably most groups in America, if you're looking at gender equality, wage equality, racial equality, any class consciousness, in order for any of those to be meaningfully progressed or achieved, it is going to require a fundamentally different governmental system. The one that we have can neither become nor can it allow to become a just system for members of our society.
What would that system be?
And frankly, the world.
What would that system be?
Well, if you're asking me, Sam, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, but so I think that we're going to disagree what that terminus looks like, but I think our goals are the same.
Right. Well, here's the thing: is that here's where I think where I would disagree, and I don't know if this is I guess it is an argument from the left, but the likelihood of whatever that new system of government that you're talking about coming into existence seems to me to be smaller than the likelihood that we can reform the judiciary, or that Bernie Sanders changes his mind on the filibuster. Or that he has the ability to go to West Virginia and convince Joe Manchin to give in on one or two things. I don't know what meaningful means to you, but I can think of, even if I put myself in the mindset of they're going to stop Bernie on everything they can, and I'm talking about Democrats.
Right.
Okay, even if I put myself in that mindset, things like DACA, things like DAPA, things like an expansion of where we are in healthcare, things like $15 minimum wage, things like expansion of Social Security. These are all things that I think are going to happen, even if they fight Bernie on the biggest of things that he wants to fight on. And I think those are meaningful. I don't think that they're fundamental in the way maybe that you're talking about, but I do think they're meaningful.
Can I make a quick point?
Yes.
I'm not trying to...
Hold on for 1 second.
Sorry.
So I'm of the belief that the Democratic Party fundamentally is the problem. And I think a lot of folks don't really, I spent a lot of time in the process of the Democratic Party for a reason, because people don't understand how it works and the rules aren't out there. But the reason I say that is, you know, in the early 80s, late 70s, when the Koch brothers started investing in state legislatures and the Republican Party taking over the judiciary, taking over, you know, legislatures and, you know, taking away our rights, which we see today still. That was also the same time when the Democratic Party decided, oh, guess what? We're going to become a centralized party and we're not going to invest in states. And then it got worse and worse and worse. And so we've been losing these battles as they've been making ground. It's why I believe, like, we really have to understand how the DNC is structured and functions, because they're setting the tone for the DCCC and for, you know, our investment in and the message and what kind of candidates and polls are done. It really does have this effect. And I look at the membership of the DNC and I'm like, there are 30 bad actors holding this all up. So if you want to have a real revolution, good luck fighting the military-industrial complex with your you know, small little army. How about you take on the 30 people through ideology and calling them out that are holding up everything in the DNC, because they're lobbyists for the weapons manufacturers and for the oil companies, and they're the ones setting the tone on everything in insurance companies.
Hold that thought, because I want to return to that in terms of, like, just sort of from a process standpoint. But okay, so just respond to that idea that any of the fundamental change that you're talking about is more apt to happen than the reasons that you and I've stipulated prevent that change within the context of the system we have.
Well, I will try to respond to it as directly as I can, but the reason that I feel so strongly about this, what is essentially a political shot at the moon, is that we have like 20 years, maybe, left of society if we don't do something about climate change. You know, like, we have 20 years left to do something. Like, there are people dying already every day in the beleaguered and exploited global South because we refuse to take action, and we're concerned with things like the petty actions of a party. And the more we fight about that, the more that we don't fix this. Like,
okay, I mean, but this is all preamble. I mean, get to what. So you believe that, you know, we should swing for the fences, but I want to know, like, what the odds are for. I want to know what that constitutes, and then what you think the odds are. Right.
I honestly don't know what the odds are.
Okay.
That's what's terrifying about it.
All right. Well, what constitutes, what is it you're talking about?
Oh, sorry, you broke up briefly. Would you mind repeating that question?
What are you talking about? So you're saying that our current system is not going to work. Give me the alternative so that we can assess whether it's actually, like, I mean, you know, I could give you an alternative too. I have magical powers. I can control everything through my mind, and I change everything. I just pick a day and boom, then everybody shows up. It's like Freaky Friday and everything changes. What is your solution?
Well, mine is slightly less fantastic. I just believe that it would require an organic movement of a workers' party that would not shackle itself to the chains of our current political system in order to effect the change directly and with commensurate force to which it is opposed.
So how do you do that in states where the you know, the laws are different to get on the ballot? I mean, the WFP, which I wouldn't say is an actual workers' party, has been trying to do this for 20 years, and they have different rules and different, you know, they have ballot line in New York, they don't have one in Arizona.
Oh, I think he's using the Leninist definition of the party, which is a little bit different than what we traditionally think of as political parties.
Well, let me ask you this.
I've actually got my copy of State and Revolution in front of me.
But let me ask you this.
Make references
okay, what is inhibiting that now? Do you think it's that people are too caught up in the process of what's going on with the DNC?
No, I think that, you know, society exists in order that people don't realize the power they have. Like, the media, the government, politics in general, all of these things seek to atomize people and deprive them of class consciousness.
I agree.
So, yeah. And so that I don't think that it is possible under the current regime.
No, I know that. You said that. That was the premise of this.
People.
No, I understand that. But I'm asking you, what is the theory of change?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like it's, I hear what you're saying. If the workers of the country,
workers of the world,
if the workers of the world rose up and overthrow the current structure, things would be different.
Yeah.
If is doing a tremendous amount of work there.
Can I say something here? Because I think we talk about, revolution or whatever you want to call revolution. Like, if we don't do that, we're going to continue on with the status quo that we have right now. And that's absolutely not true.
Mm-hmm.
We are headed off of a cliff. That is the way that the track is headed. So whether or not a revolution could work, the alternative is worse. And I know that.
But I'm not even arguing that a revolution couldn't work. I'm arguing, like, how do you get there? Like, I can tell you exactly how you get rid of the filibuster. You pressure Bernie and probably just wait until he gets into a position where he thinks it's the safest time to actually introduce. Like, I don't think that's the idea of Bernie Sanders reversing himself on the filibuster, let's say, which is one of the things that you cited.
Mm-hmm.
I think is actually very high. If he's in a position where a filibuster would hurt his chances versus help. Like, I think that's a very, I actually think it would be political malfeasance on some level to too vociferously talk about getting rid of the filibuster when you're not in a position to gain anything from that. Right. I'd rather wait to see if the Democrats could take the Senate. So that I can explain to you, and I can say, and part of the way that can happen is just simply a big push. And when we talk about reform of the judiciary, I think a President Sanders, I think a President, Julian Castro could go to the Supreme Court and say, get word to Roberts, like, look, we're going to push for this. We're going to push for some type of reform. And but you need to explain to me how you get to this class consciousness and what the opportunity cost of the, what I think you would perceive as either incrementalism or futile incrementalism is.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Well, no, I'm asking him a question, so let him answer. No, you go. You answer, because we spent a lot of time on this. I'm getting a little frustrated because I've stipulated everything you wanted to say.
I'm not trying to frustrate you.
No, I've stipulated everything.
Yeah.
How do you get to what you think needs to happen?
That's kind of, unfortunately, that's a question that hasn't been answered by history, right? I mean, this has been attempted in France and Germany and Russia and Burkina Faso. Like, this has all been attempted, but it's been frustrated. It's been foiled. That's not a question that has a definite answer. It's not a math equation.
Okay, but see, you're not even giving me a non-definite answer. And I'll tell you what, so when I think about what is, if we have the clock ticking for 20 years, what is a greater distraction from what needs to be done? It would be what you're positing to me. This is just my opinion. If you cannot, if you
can't exist as it does.
Well, okay, that's great.
And it's a very privileged.
But well, it may be or may not.
I'm sorry. If your child is in a cage right now, the revolution needed to happen a month ago, 5 months ago, a year ago. Having this theoretical revolution, which is exactly what it is, given that attempts have not succeeded. It is a theoretical revolution rather than strategically. I mean, if you want to talk revolution, you want to talk about, war, you have to be strategic. You have to have actual moves. You have to say, okay, this person is standing in the way. We need to pressure this person. This is where
there has to be a
the
theory of change.
PowerPoints are. Yeah, exactly. Theory of change or a map or it's Do we have 20 years? Possibly. We're going off a cliff. It's happening right now. It's not 20 years. It's happening
but
right
let's
now.
just stipulate that at 20 years, we can say it's 30 years, we can say it's 12, we can say it's 40. I mean, it doesn't matter. The point is that like, if you don't even have, I'm not saying a definite, I'm not asking for, my money back if this doesn't work. I'm just asking for an idea of like, just give me even the harebrained version.
Is it a massive strike? Is it, workers of the world unite? Okay, but how? This isn't Leninist Russia. This is 2019 Koch brotherland.
There are lots and lots of ways for us to do this. And one of the reasons that I like being in DSA is because they don't make you choose, right? I'm not against reforms. I think all of us are for, if we're all in favor of reforms. If all the reforms do is make people's lives a little less crappy, then great. If what they do is build class consciousness in a way that builds our movement more and more, that's really good too. That's the best case scenario. So I'm never going to be that focused on the electoral part, but I'm happy that other people are doing it. I would love to focus more on things like dual power, right? Building up independent working class institutions that can run things in their area. Right. I'm real into municipalism. I think that's going to be really important. And, as we go into more and more crises, it's possible that the state's going to break down and these institutions need to be ready to step in. But like the state's probably not going to wither away on its own. And I think we also need to redefine what we mean by revolution, because a lot of people think of revolution as like fighting in the streets or whatever. That's not going to work. That's never worked in a capitalist democracy, except, maybe briefly in the Spanish Civil War, which was not coincidentally led by anarchists. So I'm going to keep my sectarianism out of it, though, even though you've unmasked yourself as tanky scum.
But listen, but here's the here's the point is that like, there's nothing. I just don't know. I think there should be more organizing on the ground. I think both for the aims that Jamie's talking about, and just as sort of some type of a muscle in the street in the event that we have someone on the inside who for whom that from a legislative process or from a movement process, can be swayed and pushed in certain directions and can be backed up. I mean, all of this is good. It's just that when you get to, when you say we need to go from here to there, and in between we just do it with a black box. I'm sorry. Like, you got to come back and tell me what's in that black box before I stop doing other things that are actually tangible. Right. And
I'm not saying that electoralism is something you do every 2 years.
I'm not just talking about electoralism. I'm saying I'm just played a clip of people occupying offices there that I think will make a difference. At the very least, it will raise people's consciousness about the importance of the courts and what's going on. I mean, I think I'm not just saying electoralism. I'm saying organizing, but.
But the party, the Democratic Party, this is what people, I think our generation don't get because we don't know the previous party, was a working class funded party. We did have a decentralized structure. We did push for municipalization.
To some degree.
But for a solid 20 years, the largest funder of the Democratic Party is still the teachers union. And that's not debated. It still exists. Doesn't mean that they're putting all the pressure that they should. As unions have been attacked, and they're not all perfect, at the same, listen, go back to the era when the Democrats, which they used to equate to the mafia because of its union association, there was more power locally. Mm-hmm. It was different. Tammany Hall was corrupt, but it also represented workers who did not have a voice in government. And that was, municipalized government. So, these things used to go hand in hand. Now it's just like this corporate entity.
It is the only logical conclusion of a party that serves capital.
I think the overemphasis on the party is kind of a mistake in either direction. And I'll admit that I got this from reading Gilles Dauvé, which is some real galaxy brain shit. But what he basically said was, if you're obsessed with building the party to the exclusion of all else, that's bad. If you're obsessed with not having a party, that's bad too. You're the council communists, he said, we're going about it the wrong way. If you're doing the work, the party will take care of itself. And by party, he means basically any working class formation that arises to take power.
I mean, I think listen. I appreciate the phone call. Get back to that black box, and when you have the answer, even if it's not the definite one, I'll take it.
The hard thing is that this is something that we're going to have to figure out over the course of struggle, and it's always going to be a harder sell than, oh, here's this incremental reform that can make people's lives better right away. But I think
it's not even a sell yet, though. That's my point.
The further we go, the more we're going to see that these kinds of incremental reforms are necessary but insufficient to really solve the root causes of these problems, like kids being locked in cages.
And that may or may not be the case, but you can just get the kids out of the cages.
Right. I don't think they're all incremental. I think that's what people are getting confused about. It's been incremental because the corporate people have had the control, but right now we're much more.
Talk about that 30. So you have, I think, as probably a clear-eyed perspective of exactly what the DNC can and cannot do, and its strength and its power, or to the extent that it's been overstated or understated, or you've seen it from the inside. Like when you say there's 30 people.
Yeah, there's. I mean, I wouldn't say around 30 people. There's 235 members or something like that of the DNC. And there's a good chunk that are reformers, like real reformers. You could just look at the vote between Keith Ellison and Tom Perez. There are people who've had frustrations way before Bernie Sanders and didn't even support Bernie Sanders with how the DNC functions. But there are a group of people that are DNC members that are voting, that are mostly appointed by Tom Perez or previous chairs and have been reappointed, who are literally working for weapons dealers, who are in the business of war, who are in the business of making sure that the Democratic Party stays in those interests. And so that they don't have climate debates. They're representing oil companies.
Right.
They also happen to be, contributors on MSNBC and CNN and writing for the New York Times. They're the ones you're seeing in the media. They're the ones that the DNC puts out as spokespeople. They're not elected in the DNC like all the other members. They're not all perfect. I think a lot of DNC members still vote for whatever the chair says to do because they're probably more likely to be party hacks.
Right.
But there are folks, union members, organizers, activists who have been fighting this fight for a really long time. The problem is right now is the DNC is not following its own rules. And, they don't have any budget oversight, which I've complained about.
Right.
This is process stuff. It's actually not incremental. I mean, what you saw with, I believe change happens in spurts. Incremental is the process that happens over time. But if you don't pay attention to process, you're going to get attacked. And that's how the Koch brothers snuck under our noses and completely took over our government.
So how much of an improvement were the reforms that came through? I mean, are there less of those people? The fact that Perez is appointing 30, I mean, I would imagine
more,
maybe,
actually,
let's say it's 50.
They have he appoints.
I imagine 4 years ago, you would have said, the problem is 120 people.
No, I think it's always kind of been around the same number since, don't forget, there was a ban on lobbyists in the DNC when Obama was president. But the DNC was not, they didn't have elections before for chairs. So Debbie Wasserman Schultz was just appointed and she used her executive. Nobody paid attention to the rules. They would have these big events and they were like fundraising events and the DNC members were used as props, as Dr. Zogby says. But on there's committees within the DNC, just like in Congress. And those committees will be like the rules committee. And then how funny is it that everybody on the rules committee is not elected, but appointed? We tried to change that on the Unity Reform Commission, but we didn't have enough votes.
So what can we do?
Call these people out. There is a list of DNC members in your community. Find out what they do. I mean, I think this is something that's really great for the crowd to do. I don't think you should leave it to even activists in the DNC because they've just been dealing with these fights for so long.
Right.
That's part of the problem is that the DNC members are so tired. The ones that have been doing activism. It's the outside folks, the Sunrise Movement folks who have shined a light. It's Bernie Sanders' platform committee made up of folks that were in the DNC that shined a light on and exposed what was happening internally. So, find out who these DNC members are. It's listed. The Intercept has done a lot of work on this. I'm happy to, tweet responses for specific, questions, but there are very large lobbying groups that represent Republicans and Democrats who are DNC voting members. But when I say they're bad people, I mean, they're bad people. Like, really bad people. And if you don't think that makes a difference in where Kamala Harris stands on certain issues, also some of these consultants will represent oil companies and a presidential candidate.
How much can they influence, or how do they influence the outcome of the primaries?
Well, the primary, I guess that's a little bit different, but back when we had superdelegates, tremendously so.
Right.
The climate debate, for instance, was decided not to happen. That can influence a primary in terms of issues.
So it's bank shots in terms of like the outcome of the primary, but it creates a structure that
well, here's an example.
that people conform to and develop their sort of almost ideological perspective.
Yes, and so the Democratic primary rules were set already, and part of that was through the Unity Reform Commission. We had a big fight over Iowa and caucuses. The law says that a state has to determine whether they want a primary or a caucus. It was not up to the Unity Reform Commission, although there was a massive smear campaign effort to make it sound like the Bernie people were racist and only wanted caucuses because they falsely accused caucuses of not being diverse enough. But the problem is that caucuses, they have a lot of issues depending on the state. So we called for all these reforms. Iowa pushed for it. And now the DNC is saying the technology was not sophisticated enough, and again advised Iowa. I believe they're trying to push Iowa to become a primary state because it's so influential in the elections and usually sides with populism that the Democrats cannot control the outcome. And it really sets the tone for the presidential primary.
Interesting. Let's go to the phones. Calling from an 850 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. My name's Donnie. I'm from Florida.
Donnie, what's on your mind?
I wanted to talk to you about legalization of drugs. I believe in full decriminalization of drugs, but I was curious as to what you think should be the line in the sand when legalizing. Do you think cocaine should be legal or psychedelics, or what are your opinions on that?
I haven't spent too much time on it, but I would legalize probably psychedelics before I would legalize cocaine. I probably would maybe decriminalize it. I think I'd probably decriminalize most drugs, but I would legalize obviously marijuana and maybe psychedelics.
Because when you legalize things, it can also be used to the effect that, overprescribing.
When you legalize them, you're putting them within a context of a legal framework, and you're regulating, you're taxing and whatnot. I think there's a lot more benefits, I think, to psychedelics, that ultimately we'll find in marijuana than I would say cocaine, frankly.
Oh yeah. I'm very passionate about this subject. I've done a lot of reporting on it. I've talked to people whose lives have literally been saved by psychedelic therapies for alcoholism and opioid addiction. And I think it's a crime that these things are not more widely available to people.
Have you read Michael Pollan's new book?
I have not.
Appreciate the call.
I think he's trying to mainstream it.
Thank you.
Hell yeah.
Was very tempted to do an imitation of you, Sam, as Michael doing an imitation.
I think that we should, psychedelics.
Take the magic mushroom. It's good for you.
Here
I'm so bad at it.
A clip from this Now This News. Medicare for All advocate Ady Barkan. He is he has ALS, I believe, and he's been, I think he first came onto the scene when he questioned Ted Cruz on the plane in the lead up to the votes on the Affordable Care Act, and he has been, as he is basically dying, he has been a tireless advocate, and here he is interviewing Kamala Harris on her Medicare for All plan.
First, only Medicare for All will get everyone the care they need. Under your plan, millions of people like me will still be denied care by their for-profit insurance company during the 10-year transition period and afterwards. In addition, people will avoid getting needed care because of high copays and deductibles. Second, only a true Medicare for All system will drive down costs. It will save us hundreds of billions of dollars per year in administrative and billing costs that are the result of a for-profit insurance system. That will not happen if providers still have to bill numerous insurance companies. Finally, there is the political reality. The insurance industry is going to do everything it can to block any of these proposals, including yours. Which means the only way to win is with a huge grassroots movement. And from what I can see, that enthusiasm only exists for Medicare for all. So where am I wrong?
Under my Medicare for All plan, on day one, you can get into the system of Medicare for All and have a public plan. You don't have to do a private plan. It's your choice.
Your plan has a 10-year transition period until it is fully enacted, spanning the course of at least 2 different presidencies. Given what you saw of Donald Trump's attempts to dismantle Obamacare, why do you think the transition to a different health care system should be so gradual, giving the Republicans many opportunities to block it?
What we saw in effect and what we saw as the end result is, yes, they played politics with public health. They named the Affordable Care Act Obamacare in an attempt to make it unpopular. But what we saw happen is that when more people get coverage, and under our plan, within the first 5 years, the majority of Americans will be covered, as opposed to currently 30 million Americans not having coverage, is that the people speak. And there's a great amount of power and political power in the people.
I mean, I think there's some truth to her answer, but the other truth is that they've done quite a bit to sort of undermine the Affordable Care Act as it is. I mean, aside from just, the expansion of the Medicaid, but even within the context of the exchanges, it's still, the bones are still there. I mean, for better or for worse. What do you make of her response?
I don't know what to say at this point. She's had so many different opinions on Medicare for All that it's hard for me to take anything she says seriously. I mean, will the average primary voter know that? No. I think just talk about process. People get very overwhelmed by process. Yep. And I remember 10 years ago when we were fighting over the Affordable Care Act, how confusing it was. You get an insurance executive on there to give their spin. You have a Medicare for All advocate. It was extremely complicated, and I think even the debates on the debate stage were a little complicated for the average viewer. And that's why I think Bernie Sanders is just keeping it at Medicare for All makes it very easy for people to digest. And part of the popularity, I think, lies in that.
Here's the Times reporting that the share of Americans with health insurance declined in 2018. This is despite a strong economy. It's the first drop since 2009. Which was at least partly caused by efforts to weaken the Affordable Care Act. I imagine some of it is just that people aren't as obligated by the mandate, but there was also, I would imagine, costs were driven up significantly, and you had companies leaving the exchanges because they were not getting essentially the subsidies that not on the patient side, but on the corporate side. From the risk pool insurance, essentially, that the federal government had. But that 10-year thing, it's sort of stunning. Like, even the most sort of Medicare for All skeptical people were like, wait a second, what, 10 years? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But I think it was her way of sort of contrasting with Bernie, which, again, is sort of, I mean, it is amazing how much his plans have dictated where everybody else is.
Mm-hmm. Something else about this. I was talking to a friend in California who does not have access to health insurance right now, and she was complaining that it's just extremely difficult. The process of it is very difficult, and I think the same thing here in New York. I mean, those are 2 Democratic states that I don't know how much insurance companies lobby in New York, but in California they're pretty powerful, and New Jersey, of course. But they make the process so difficult for you that I think a lot of folks just say, I give up. It's
that is the thing that people don't understand. I think it's sort of like just putting any obstacles in, and we just see it with voting, right? Yes. I mean, there's a report out. They've closed 1,700 polling places in areas that used to be covered under pre-clearance under the Voting Rights Act. And in 2013, Shelby versus Holder, the Supreme Court essentially negated the pre-clearance formula under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, and basically said, we agree that there can be a notion of pre-clearance. This would subject states and counties. Queens, I think, was one of them, actually, that was subject to pre-clearance. So it's not just southern states. It's areas that have had in the past a record of disenfranchising people based upon their race or their religion, I believe. And the Supreme Court said, well, we agree that the concept of pre-clearance can exist. In other words, you cannot change the voting rules here without getting the DOJ to sign off on it because you have a history of doing these things in a bad way. But we don't like the formula because it's not right to hold these people responsible for past racism. And the House and the Senate can create a new formula. Now, of course, Republicans wouldn't vote on this. There is no vote. This is something that, we talk about. I think if you get a Democratic president, I don't care who it is, and you get a Democratic Senate, this is going to be something that will happen immediately. And one of the few things that I think we can really count on that they're going to reinstate, they're come up with another sort of version of Section 5. But you have 1,600, almost 1,700 polling places closed in these states that were subject to the Voting Rights Act. And the reason why they close these polls is because they want to make it harder to vote. And so every time you close the vote, I mean, look, you see examples of this in every endeavor. Even Think Progress saying, like, you could opt out of paying us. We're just not going to. The reason why you do that is because okay, 30% of people will opt out. 60% of people will opt out. Whatever that number is less than 100% if you turned off the machine. And they know that every time they close a poll, there's probably some Republican operative somewhere saying, like, if you close a polling place in a district with 60% African-American population, you will increase the likelihood of a Republican winning in that district by 1.3%. I mean, there is a formula. And that was the stuff, I think, that we found on that hard drive of this dead Republican operative, which was, affected the outcome of the census question, I think, the 2020 census question on immigration. It affected the outcome in North Carolina, no doubt. I have a feeling that as they dig through this stuff, it's going to affect some other states.
Again, it's process.
And it's process. It's all process. They just know, like, we don't have to make a big announcement that we're suppressing the vote of black people. We can just administratively close stuff, procedure, process, and have real world outcomes. And it is not as sexy. It is very hard to organize people around that. It involves a lot more sort of like detailed understanding of what's going on. And there's no glory. I think you can attest to that. But it is hugely, hugely important in terms of real outcomes. I mean,
and it's why investigative reporting is also so important. We have a lot of clickbait reporting right now, but it costs a lot of money. When the reporting crisis happened 10 years ago, the first to be cut were city reporters. Legislative reporters, so House reporters, and which covered process, and investigative journalists, because it's expensive.
Let's just talk about this, what's going on in California, because this is a big deal. Here is the cheers that went up in the California Capitol in the passing of AB 5. People were pretty excited. They were working on it. This is going to mean a lot for a lot of workers, because often what happens in California doesn't just stay there. But in California, they're talking about maybe 1 million workers who are going to be affected by this. The bill passed 29-11 in the Senate, in the state Senate. It will apply to app-based companies. I don't know how much further it goes beyond these app-based companies. And it's not the people who are developing the app, that it's the people who are using the app in these sort of like gig economy type of situation.
What defines it as app-based? Like, would Seamless be app-based if it's got a website and a...
I would imagine Seamless they already classify their delivery people as workers anyways, as opposed to contractors. But I would imagine that would apply. Gavin Newsom has said he's going to sign it. The state assembly has basically already indicated that they're going to pass it. It would go in effect January 1st. That workers must be designated as employees instead of contractors if a company exerts control over how they perform their tasks and if their work is part of the company's regular business. So here is, and I don't know how you define regular business, is what the regulatory agency in the state will determine. Maybe it's a function of like, what percentage of your business is a function of drivers picking people up and dropping them off? Mm-hmm. And if it's, 100%, that's definitely part of your regular business. If it's 25%, maybe it's not. But here is the cheers that went up in the State House. Now, this is an example. This is not electoral politics. It's legislative politics. It's organizing around and bringing pressure. Politicians largely, it is, what percentage of people actively organized around this in California? Even measurable, I don't know, 5%, maybe. I mean, the amount of people that it takes to make these changes, I think, is far smaller than people imagine.
Shame is powerful.
Yeah,
MLK was the number one tool he used. He said shame,
and it works. And politicians don't want to be seen as standing in the way of things that are important to people.
I bet you Kamala Harris is going to change her mind again after this Hottie Barkin video.
It's conceivable.
Oh, yeah.
It really is conceivable. This is, and basically what happens is if you're a contractor, you're 1099, you're not getting paid into Social Security. Mm-hmm. Theoretically, I think you got to do that yourself, but you got to double it up. You are not subject to minimum wage. You don't necessarily need to make a minimum wage. You do not have unemployment insurance through the state. And there may be other protections, but those are the big ones. And this is going to impact Uber and Lyft. It's going to impact, this will also maybe like nail salon workers apparently were brought in. Maybe I would imagine also like maybe barbers. I mean, it depends on what the relationship is with these places. Maybe in nail salons, I'm not 100% sure how it works, but maybe it's like, we give you the nail stuff and you come in and you're just a contractor. You work, on, like you're a trainer at, a gym and you have some relationship with the gym or something.
What about undocumented workers?
I mean, undocumented are still basically, I don't think this impacts them whatsoever any more or less than it would now. So you come in, if anything, it might make it more difficult in some instances for undocumented to work because they need to establish they have a Social Security number to get into the system.
Well, you do that for independent contractors too, theoretically, right?
What's that?
Have a Social Security number and all that.
But if you're like in a nail salon, for instance, and there was a huge New York Times expose on this a few years ago about the workers in a good number of workers in nail salons were living there, where there was a whole system of recruiting them from Southeast Asia. Right. It was horrifying.
I think the difference when if I take your Social Security number for a 1099 as opposed to if I take your Social Security number because I'm actually going to pay into your account,
right?
I think is probably the level of scrutiny is different. But I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, soon people, I think, will get more in-depth reporting on this and find out. But this is a big deal because they're talking about it could impact 1 million workers in California, and it's certainly going to impact workers all across the country. It's a possibility with 1 million workers? That would be crazy.
That's amazing. No, I absolutely believe it. And the way that most of these garbage tech companies make money is not by inventing something new in the world. It's by labor and regulatory arbitrage, getting around the rules that exist for a normal taxi company by saying, oh no, we're just a tech company. So any time that you tell people they can't do that is a victory for workers.
Indeed. And you know what else worked on labor arbitrage? Cotton and the building of this country, basically.
Yep.
Free labor is very helpful when you're trying to start a business, apparently.
Or a country.
Or a country. Let's just end the clips, and we'll get into a couple more phone calls and some IMs with where we started. This is Donald Trump on 9/11. I haven't seen the whole speech. Is this one he gave this morning or something? I haven't seen the whole speech. I don't know if he talked about how brave he was when he went down there, or how many thousands of Muslims he saw cheering out of his window. I don't know if he mentioned the fact that on the upside, on 9/11, it made his building the tallest one in the city, like he did while there was still smoke in the air. I don't even know if the second tower had fallen. Well, it must have been right after the second tower fell, where Donald Trump, in an interview, bragged that his building was now the biggest one in New York City. Oh my God. I mean, the guy's a lunatic. But here he is. In some ways, it's his, like, this is why I will be the national security advisor to myself.
We do not seek conflict. But if anyone dares to strike our land, we will respond with the full measure of American power and the iron will of the American spirit. And that spirit is unbreakable. We had peace talks scheduled a few days ago. I called them off when I learned that they had killed a great American soldier from Puerto Rico and 11 other innocent people. They thought they would use this attack to show strength, but actually what they showed is unrelenting weakness. The last 4 days, we have hit our enemy harder than they have ever been hit before, and that will continue. And if for any reason they come back to our country, we will go wherever they are and use power the likes of which the United States has never used before. And I'm not even talking about nuclear power. They will never have seen anything like what will happen to them. No enemy on earth can...
I mean, this is a written speech.
Mm-hmm. Jesus Christ.
This actually feels like he wrote this, doesn't it? Like, who the hell, who even says, like, nuclear power? Like, it's
beyond nuclear power. What's
nuclear
beyond
plus.
Nuclear power?
I mean, you want to know why Posadism is making a comeback with its fetishization of global thermonuclear war. It's stuff like this.
Well, it's, I mean, he's talking, though, beyond nuclear power, something that is, like, even that transcends nuclear power.
Hydrogen bombs.
The idea that he's using this opportunity to provide himself cover for screwing up these peace talks with the Taliban. I mean, the reality is that there has been ongoing hostilities and killings by the Taliban and by American forces throughout this entire 8 or 9 month process in which they've been negotiating this stuff. I mean, it's a complete lie. They screwed up. They didn't even let the Afghan government know that this was going on, that the deal had been made. They just said, show up, you're going to be here so we can take pictures with you when we sign this with the Taliban. And the Afghan government, sure shocking,
But
said...
then they were like, oh, wait, master.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's... And the idea that he's using this speech as a sort of a way of trying to salvage something is... this is impressive stuff. He clearly... I think they must have fired Bolton's speechwriter, too, or whoever it is, the National Security Advisor speechwriter. But go ahead.
No enemy on earth can match the overwhelming strength, skill, and might of the American armed forces.
Wow.
He's got a scientist developing Ice 9 in a lab right now as we speak.
I'm going to use superpowers. There it is. Calling for
The defense secretary, the new one, I can't keep track of the names right now. I'm
Pompeo.
Sorry. No, not defense secretary.
Post Shannon.
I can't even remember this guy's name.
See,
now.
thank
Yeah,
you. I'm
yes,
not the
yeah,
only
sorry.
one. He gave a speech right after, and my jaw dropped when I heard it because it was on the same level, but not Trump.
They tailor it for Trump. They're all like him now. Water boat from Kashmir. Last week, I wrote down pertinent information about the current situation in Kashmir. The pages filled up and I wasn't anywhere close to being done. I called in on Thursday when Michael asked me what was going on in Kashmir. I was so overwhelmed by what I had written down. I said to Michael, there's so much. Why don't you ask me a question? I'll mention just one aspect now. People that get arrested are gone. No records whatsoever. Prisons and detention camps are overflowing to the point that they have been moving Kashmiris outside of Kashmir to India for 3 weeks now. The biggest occupation weapon that India has is the lack of information about Kashmir, and this black hole of information is amplifying daily. Look, there's good things that Tulsi Gabbard brings to the debate. If you hear, and certainly we don't have a bunch of politicians who are coming out, speaking out about what's going on in Kashmir. They don't all have a record of praising and supporting Modi. But this, I think, is unhelpful to educate people about what's going on in Kashmir. And again, fair is fair. It's not like I've heard, many of the other candidates. I mean, I know Bernie has spoken to a little bit, but I haven't heard any of the other candidates come out and forcefully make a case for what's going on in Kashmir or calling attention to it. This, making it a little bit of like both sidism is, I think, a little problematic. Play this clip.
On the issue in Kashmir, what is your personal idea as to how we deal with such a complex situation instead of painting it as a black and white issue?
Yeah, well, first of all, recognizing that it is complex.
Pause it for 1 second. I think, here's the question: Is Kashmir a complex question? Of course it is. It has been a complex question for decades. It has been one of the greatest sort of national security concerns for the entire world,
right?
The world's security.
Right.
What's going on there now is a fairly black and white question. Should this type of oppression be condoned in the form of absolutely no action by the U.S. government?
First of all, recognizing that it is complex. It is not as clear cut as this one side versus this one side. And I think it's important as outsiders looking in to understand the complex history of Kashmir and what has happened to people there in the past and how many families were driven from their homes there and fled and have not been able to return home. How the previous government had
Incidentally, she's talking about she is not talking about these people in Kashmir right now who are being sent to India in the overflowing camps that are, people are being disappeared. She is getting back to the original question. I mean, this is something that the left would never tolerate in terms of the question of Israel and Palestine.
Nope.
And certainly not this type of
or Standing Rock, which you went to.
Right. I mean, it's just there. There's no candidates that we have that are above criticism. And but continue.
And fled and have not been able to return home. How the previous government had policies in place that made homosexuality illegal, that suppressed the voices of women, that made it. I met a woman a couple of days ago who said that she, as a Kashmiri woman, had no rights to own property.
Pause it for 1 second. Incidentally, if you go back and to the summer of 2001, when there were problems with Afghanistan, when the Taliban was not, this is one of the reasons where people at that time were talking about why we should attack Afghanistan, even prior to 9/11. Now, when you arrest people wholesale and put them in prisons, you're also sort of denying them freedom. But go ahead.
Who said that she, as a Kashmiri woman, had no rights to own property there in her homeland. So these changes are things that are happening in a sovereign country. They're very difficult. There are concerns that should be addressed about human rights violations and civil rights violations. But overall, I think this is a situation, again, in a sovereign country that must be worked out by all sides who have a stake in their own future there.
I mean, I don't think anybody's calling for military intervention, but the idea that we wouldn't take a position on this seems to me to be naive. I think there's, I don't think it's naivete that is driving that. I think it's just on a different side of the issue. Can justify that type of stuff. Doe Link. In my humble opinion, the only Democrat who can handle Trump on a debate stage would be Bernie. Biden would be a catastrophe. By the way, from yesterday, very basic, humble one-bedroom apartment in Houston, $1,000 plus. Michael Moore, where to invade next? A perfect depiction of social democracy. Harry Inney. Hi, Nomiki's dad here. For years, I would reflect.
Oh, God, no, please move on.
Is this really your dad?
Maybe. Move on. I don't know what he's saying, but just move on.
What?
My dad's very internet heavy. Yeah.
He was talking about Sex in the City.
I don't know. Oh, he's a fan of yours?
I don't know what he's saying.
Anyways, move on. Whatever.
Oh.
If your dad ever calls into the show, or your mom, ignore it.
This could be a joke.
It could be for all of us.
And it's just the payoff of the joke is I now just recently realized the whole thing is a silly construct about saying that I'm a Miranda or a Samantha, and none of us fit nearly
this sounds great.
into a. Yeah, I like to read it. I don't think it's actually.
What does it have to do with?
I think it's just a joke. For years ago, I would reflexively go around saying I was a Miranda, but upon actual reflection, I decided I'm actually a Samantha. And now, just recently, I realized the whole thing is a silly construct, and none of us fit neatly into any Sex and City character. I don't.
Oh, is that based on polling? When we were talking about the constructs,
I have no idea.
I don't think that's actually my dad.
I have a feeling
my dad does not know that much about Sex in the City, as far as I know. But he would do this. Just
Buju Pacman, are you going to debate any libertarians at Politicon? I am not going to Politicon, so I will not be. Ben Shapiro, puberty blockers. Sam, I think you should tell libertarians to F off the first time they start repeating sentences and changing the premise. Dumb assery yesterday. We had a libertarian call in. And Steve Callie, hell yeah, John Bolton is a free agent, and now he can finally supplant Bernie Sanders and Liz Warren in the Progressive Caucus, unless the Patriots sign him first. Ciderista, why did people stay home in Wisconsin? It's because nobody in the choir you preached to wanted to volunteer for Clinton. Why didn't anybody want to volunteer for Clinton? She has a trash progressive record and was running on trash things. Did these IMs even get through? I think that's true. I mean, I think that, and I would even go even a step further. They either did not try and create a ground game, or they realized that it would be too hard. They started using algorithms to model stuff, and they didn't find out how bad a shape they were in until it was too late. And by too late, I mean like the day they started sending people out to get out the vote.
It was definitely an algorithm heavy campaign, and the amount of money they put into Texas, for instance, and the margins were not that small. Even the last 2 weeks of the campaign, I remember this story has now come out publicly, but the deputy campaign manager for Bernie Sanders, Bernie was campaigning for Hillary, if you recall, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Ohio, and he was flying commercial, and people would stop him. Of course, he's Bernie Sanders, and it was really, it's not very time efficient to do so. So they asked, could you offer one of your campaign planes for Bernie, given the fact that he is campaigning for you, Hillary Clinton, might we remind them? And they said, no, we can't afford it. And then they pumped in, I think it was like tens of millions of dollars into an ad campaign in Texas in a district they knew very well. And Ronnie Patrice, who's the deputy campaign manager for Bernie, was from Texas. She's like, I know that's not going anywhere. You can't afford this. You can't afford an office in Wisconsin. You can't afford an office in Ohio. You're not going to do as well as you think you are in Texas. And it's a consultant game too. It's like, what we have to understand is there's not a lot of big money. There's money, but not big money in field. There's a lot of big money in media and polling. and whatever new scientific model they come up with next week.
I mean, it's amazing how stuff like that comes down to that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's why you don't have lobbyists and consultants on the DNC setting the rules of the primary.
Yes. Human brain. Human Brian. I'll be going to Vegas for the first time in a couple of weeks. Any tips for someone who's never gambled before? Yes.
Don't gamble.
Read up and probably don't gamble. Wizard of Odds, if you really want to go deep. But what I would do if I were you is do what I did one time down there. Is there's you can go and for like an hour drive a piece of heavy machinery.
What do you mean heavy machinery? Like
I did a skid, what do you call it? One of those skid trackers or whatever it is. And you could do a bulldozer. I think next time I'm going to go down and do a backhoe. In Vegas.
Do they
that definitely happens
you first?
What's that?
Do they breathalyze you first before they let you drive
Nope.
a backhoe?
Nope. You can do whatever you want there. And
hell yeah.
A skid steer. I did a skid steer, and I think next time I'm going to do a bulldozer.
Wait, where is this?
In Vegas.
Like where in Vegas? Like
They
at a
just go,
casino in the basement?
Literally, like it's just there's so many empty plots that they're building on at any point. Like they're expanding the city. They just find an empty plot and like you don't need much room. You just like basically learn to do. It was more or less like a big bobcat.
Okay.
If anybody, so it has a front loader, and I would go scoop up dirt from one area, drive it across the other, and dump it off. It was fun to drive.
Wow, they really do make any fantasy come true in that town.
They have they have those, and then you can also fire off like apparently a semi-automatic weapon.
Ooh.
While you're on the
I don't know.
tractor-trailer?
There seems to be some combination between the two, but I didn't look into the guns. I was more interested in the.
I might have to go back there and check that out.
Is there whiskey and bacon involved?
No, none of that. Steve Sad. Josh Gottemeyer of New Jersey 5th District has a primary challenger in Arati Krybech. Please volunteer and donate to her campaign. Also, Nate Silver's dangerous, ignorant hack who advises against impeachment because he doesn't know how politics work. I think on Ring of Fire, I'm going to have her on. We've been doing challengers to. Do you ever think that there's any situation where a Democrat shouldn't be primaried?
No. I'm of the Ro Khanna mentality. He primaried a progressive, and his state now he says, primary me. I believe in democracy. It's expensive. I understand the rationale behind don't primary good Democrats. Definitely be strategic, but are you doing it because you want to oust a progressive? Are you doing it because you're a mechanism of an institution? Are you doing it because you want to raise your name ID and it might actually hurt the person? Maybe not the best idea, but I believe in the democratic process.
There's two things that have brought me around on primarying Democrats, regardless of who they are. One is that they need, even in the instances of like, even if they're good, they need the pressure for certain issue sets that they can bring back to a Nancy Pelosi and say like, I'm in trouble here and I've got to vote this way. And so I can't be, you need to release me, or I need to vote for this. Like I think Nadler with impeachment, I think that he at the very least is pretending like he's impeaching because of his primary challenge.
Absolutely.
Also, the second thing is Ayanna Pressley. Let's play this clip here. I think it was, I can never pronounce his name. Capuano, from Massachusetts, was a good Democrat, very progressive.
Right.
But I think that having youth and some measure of diversity, and there is younger Democrats tend to be more partisan. Even if the politics align, like they tend to be more partisan, they tend to fight more, and I think that's important. And
Less time in the swamp.
Or it's not even the swamp, because I don't think Capuano was like corrupt. I just think that you are shaped by the era. Many people are shaped by the era in which they sort of, develop, and then you're stuck in that. It's like me with music. And I think on some level there's generations of Democrats who were just raised to believe that the political landscape is one way, and it's not anymore, and they don't realize that. And I think Ayanna Pressley does.
And one point about that. A lot of these primaries where people have won they're Democratic primaries in Democratic districts. It's the ones that are, I think, super important, where we really need to have a progressive economic voice is the swing districts. And that's, I think, why Nancy Pelosi in particular is saying stop primarying Democrats, because you have, the New York Democrats who are great at raising money, and they're now at home having to fight off challengers because they're raising money for the swing districts. That's sort of their machination. They can't say that publicly. It's not very sexy, but that's really what's happening, is that it's expensive. And, oh well, do your job.
Right, exactly. Here's Ayanna Pressley on the, what committee is she in here? This is the Finance Committee. And here, play this clip.
What does all this mean ultimately? It means that people are alive but not living. This debt is not just choking at our ability to build wealth or our purchasing power. It is quite literally choking people. We had a hearing in Oversight and Reform on trauma. And we learned that suicides are on the rise for many reasons. And one of those reasons is debt despair. So this is choking at the promise of our country, and quite literally we are losing lives because of the debt that folks are burdened by. So it is a crisis. And for those across the aisle that perhaps think that we are being dramatic, you cannot overstate a $1.6 trillion in debt, crushing close to 45 million borrowers. You cannot describe that as anything less than a crisis.
And she's talking about student debt in this country, which is, and there's a lot going on here. It is really important for Democrats to lay the groundwork for a Democratic president to come in and take some dramatic steps to alleviate this debt from people, not just in the future, but also the existing debt that exists there. And one of the things that is not in that clip, that is the case, is that there is a place in bankruptcy, there is a bankruptcy law that says that you cannot discharge that student debt, even in bankruptcy. So if I had a company and I'm getting widgets from the guy down the street, and I've used those widgets, and I've actually sold my dishwasher with those widgets in it, or whatever it is I'm selling, it's out the door, and that money is coming and giving me some compensation, I can get protected from what I owe that widget maker. But if I've borrowed money from the U.S. government, making money off of me, I cannot get protection there. And now under Betsy DeVos, even if I can prove that I was defrauded by the school that they lent the money to me to go to, I can't. And the reason why that is the case, that you cannot discharge that debt, is because of the bankruptcy bill that Joe Biden was a big champion of. And I think we're going to hear more about that tomorrow night. But in the meantime,
quit your bitching, millennials.
Well, and
stop eating avocado toast.
And the fact that you can't discharge that applies to people who are even older. Now, of course, they didn't have to take as much debt because at that time we financed public school options, which I think depressed the rate of acceleration of tuition, et cetera, and we didn't have the advent of these for-profit universities that, to his credit, Obama had started to crack down quite a bit on, and now that's done. But we're out of time. Nomi,
so much fun.
It was so much fun to have you here. We got to do this again. Absolutely. And folks, Michael will be here tomorrow. Tomorrow night, we will have live coverage of the debates. We just got to figure out where we're going to do it, what platform we're going to do it on, so that we do not get basically vaporized. But until then, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. fix you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the one